It says, "In everything, do to others what you would want them to do to you. This is what is written in the law and in the prophets. Enter God's kingdom through the narrow gate. The gate is large and the road is wide that leads to ruin. Many people go that way, but the gate is small and the road is narrow that leads to life. Only a few people find it. Watch out for false prophets. They come to you pretending to be sheep, but on the inside they are hungry wolves. You can tell each tree by its fruit. Do people pick grapes from bushes? Do they pick figs from thorns? In the same way, every good tree bears good fruit, but a bad tree bears bad fruit. A good tree can't bear bad fruit, and a bad tree can't bear good fruit. Every tree that does not bear good fruit is cut down. It's thrown into the fire. You can tell each tree by its fruit. Not everyone who says to me, 'Lord, Lord,' will enter the kingdom of heaven. Only those who do what my Father in heaven wants will enter. Many will say to me on that day, 'Lord, Lord, didn't we prophesy in your name? Didn't we drive out demons in your name? Didn't we do many miracles in your name?' Then I will tell them clearly, 'I never knew you. Get away from me.'"
If you've heard me teach, you know I like analogies. So let me start with a couple of analogies. If you ask my daughter, Andy, here, how big she is, what do you think she's going to say? Are you big or small? Big and small. Well, nobody can tell her that she's not big. And from her perspective, she's the biggest that she's ever been, right? But she's by far the smallest person in this entire room. And I bring this up because I feel like that sometimes, not my size, but my relationship to Jesus. From my perspective, I think Jesus is my Lord, right? I feel like when I read my Bible and I pray and I come to church on Sunday nights and I even come early and I help set up, is that enough? Or does it seem like enough because we live in a world and a nation that's just so self-centered and so materialistic that any ounce of church or Jesus in our lives make us feel like Jesus is truly the Lord of our lives? And what would Jesus say there? Here's another scenario. Last fall, Ben and I went to Dallas to a Razorback game to watch Razorbacks play the Aggies. And it was a really fun time. We were seated around a bunch of Razorback fans. There's this one guy that knew way too much about the players. If y'all ever been to a sports game where there's somebody that's weird, that's like knows their favorite food and where they went to high school and all the stats about them. That's kind of cool, but, you know, what if this guy showed up to a 19-year-old KJ Jefferson's house and said, "Hey, I know all about you. I know your mom's name. And by the way, I brought you your favorite food. Will you let me in your house?" What's KJ going to say? He's going to say, "Get away from me, weirdo. I don't know you." Right? And am I the fan that knows all about God? It's all intellectual and it's not relational. These are the questions that I asked myself as I was prepping for tonight's message. So I want you all to think about that. Are y'all okay? Breaking your ears there? Is that better? We tested this before and it didn't do this. So no, let's try this. So these are the questions I asked myself, and I want y'all to think through these as well. And tonight, I'm going to do it a little different. I'm going to start in verse 21, and then I'm going to go back up to 12, and then we'll work our way all the way back down. So open your verses again and go to verse 21. Jesus says, "Not everyone who says to me, 'Lord, Lord,' will enter the kingdom of heaven, but only the one who does the will of my Father who is in heaven." So how do we enter heaven then? We just read it. It's easy. To do the will of the Father, right? That's how you get into heaven. So that's the question is then, what is the will of God? And if you need to bring me a mic, go ahead. It's fine. At this point in time, though, when Jesus was teaching this, stand by. It never works. I don't know why I try that. So at this point in time when Jesus is teaching the disciples this, the Jews understood that the will of God was captured in the Hebrew Bible, or what they called the law and the prophets, which is, we'll get to that in verse 12 here. So they understand that the will of God is captured in the entire law and prophets. In verse 12, Jesus says, "So in everything, do to others what you would have them do to you, for this sums up the law and the prophets. And I love that. The entire Old Testament, which is what we have, right? The law and the prophets is from Genesis all the way to the end of the Old Testament, is summed up in a single principle. And that principle is pretty exciting. It's radical and it's proactive and it's energetic, and it's about doing good for others, treating others as you would treat yourself and how you would want them to treat you. And there's a couple points here I want to stick on this verse for a minute. So in the research that I did, this isn't a new thing. Jesus wasn't the first person to teach this. The Romans themselves even taught something similar to this. But they taught, don't do to others what you wouldn't wish to have done to you. Everybody's heard that, right? That's the golden rule. Don't do to others as you wouldn't want them to do to you. And that's almost the same thing, but Jesus phrases this to the disciples that's following him in a positive frame, whereas the Romans and the Jewish teachers were in the negative. He changes it from don't do things to hurt others to do something positive to help others. And he's asking his disciples to act, right? To do something. And that's the first point. We have to do something for others. And we must care for others in need. And most importantly, for us as Christians here, we need to tell people about the true gospel of Jesus. And that's easy to understand. That's common sense for the most part, right? You're not going to do something to somebody else that you wouldn't want them to do to you. It's simple. Actively do things where if you're in their position, you would want them done to you. It's easy to understand, but it's hard to follow. If everyone would do this, there wouldn't be any slavery, there wouldn't be any war, there wouldn't be any swearing, any fighting, any bad stuff, right? But we know that's not going to happen because even we as Jesus followers don't do it all the time. We fail every day. And that brings me to my second point. A huge reason that the Golden Rule sums up the entire Old Testament is because it points us to Christ. How does it do that? Well, because we break it. We break that Golden Rule, and it points us to our need for Christ. The Old Testament points us to Christ not only through those symbols and prophecies that we have talked about, but also through indicting us of our sin that we have. We're not perfect. We're never going to live up to that. And it's showing us our need for Jesus. It shows us the problem, what's our sin, and our separation from God. And then it gives us a solution, which is faith in Christ. And then having Christ, apart from what we do, we go forth and we do for others as we would have them do to us. So then Jesus goes on from verse 12, and he moves into a little bit different. He's moving on to talk about this narrow gate and this wide gate. And I'll read it real quick. It says, enter through the narrow gate, for wide is the gate and broad is the road that leads to destruction, and many enter through it. But small is the gate and narrow the road that leads to life, and only a few find it. So I want you to pay attention to the order of the road and the gate. The gate's listed first because it is the entry. It's the start of the journey on the road. A lot of times I thought that the gate was the gate to heaven, and you had to stay on this narrow road, and then once you got to the end, you had to squeeze through this narrow gate. That's not what it's talking about. The gate's the first part of the path. He's not encouraging his disciples to press along this narrow road. He's commanding them to enter this gate that's marked with hardship, that's marked with persecution and selflessness and true love of others. Jesus wants his followers to actively make a decision, and he wants them to choose this hard gate, not this wide gate. And faith in Jesus is what he's saying here, and fellowship with him is the narrow gate. That is what this narrow gate is. Some translations translate it as straight, S-T-R-A-I-T. This word means narrow passage of water that connects two bodies of water, like seas. Anyone heard of the phrase Dire Straits? Not the 80s British rock band. Corbett. Jesus is, when you say dire straits when you're in a really bad spot. When you have to make a hard decision, you're in dire straits. And that's what Jesus is saying here. He says, this gate is going to be barely large enough for you to fit through. imagine two big boulders with a little crack in it, and you've got a big pack, you've been hiking all day, and you have to drop everything to fit through it. You might have to duck. You might need to lose some weight before you get through there. You cannot get through it. It's going to be tight. And so that's what I want you to think about when you think about this gate. You can't carry anything with you. You can't carry your desires, your selfishness, your stuff. So you're surrendering all that to Jesus to choose to go through that. There's also this big wide gate here. It's an easy gate, and you have all your stuff, and you can go through it. But Jesus is saying, make a choice. Go through this way, and we'll talk about what he's going to do when you make that choice. But if you choose this way, you can carry all your stuff with you. It's going to be easy, but it leads to destruction, like Jesus said. And this world has always sought this wide gate. It's easy to see. It's never going to change. This world is always people are going to want to get to this wide gate. But the American church has also done this, and it still actively does this, which is what Jesus brings up here later. But I want to bring up a couple different, things that churches in America, maybe in the world do, because the verses we'll talk about in a minute, I want to help you look out for those. So everyone sees this massive pressure by the world today to accept all behavior, right? There's many churches that water down this truth and allow people to have their own, quote, truths. The world teaches that you can be who you want to be, and then these worldly churches teach that God loves you how you are, and that you don't have to change. You don't have to choose. You can just be you because God created you, and you can be who you are because that's how God made you. And that's a lie. This watering down of the gospel drastically reduces what the crucifixion and resurrection of Jesus did. His death on this cross, his horrible death, paid for that sin that we commit every day, that we will commit in the future. And he felt that. He felt the full wrath of God on the cross. And all he wants in return is our heart. And he wants us to choose him. And if you're not going to choose him and say, I'm going to choose this hard road, then you're falling into that wide road of destruction. And it's a choice that we make daily, right? We have to choose this every day. So that's one thing that churches do. Another thing is they teach this another false gospel. They teach that you can be saved from hell. And that's their motivation, right? Not to have a relationship with God, but to have, or with Jesus, but to be saved from hell. If you walk up to the front of church and you say this prayer and you kneel down and you do this, or you tithe here, or maybe when you were a baby you were sprinkled, or maybe you got baptized as an adult, that's your ticket, right? You go punch a ticket and you get a ticket to heaven. And these churches have become a social club. They've become no accountability. There's no life change. There's no true effect on people's lives because there's no choice that they had to make. They never had to make a choice. We in America, we're comfortable. We can be a Christian or not be a Christian, and we don't have to change the way we live, right? We can say that every day. This type of teaching leads to religion, not relationship. It doesn't require love to live this way, and in fact, it causes hate. If your comfort in this life and on this earth is more important and compelling to you than choosing Jesus daily, than dropping your needs, than teaching and sharing people about the forgiveness that Jesus offers, then we have to ask ourselves if we ever made that choice to go through that narrow gate. And unfortunately, there's many people living, in these two groups in this city, much less the world. That's why Jesus warns his disciples here in these next few verses in 15 through 20, and I'll read them. Watch out for false prophets. They come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly they are ferocious wolves. By their fruit you will recognize them. Do people pick grapes from thorn bushes or figs from thistles? Likewise, every good tree bears good fruit, but a bad tree bears bad fruit. A good tree cannot bear bad fruit, and a bad tree cannot bear good fruit. Every tree that does not bear good fruit is cut down and thrown into the fire. Thus, by their fruit you will recognize them. Pay attention to the lives of yourself and others, especially others that are leading ministry. To me, to the people that are up here. Y'all are a part of this group, so y'all need to watch the leaders of this church. The teachers, the pastors. Our lives should reflect righteousness and faithfulness and humility. And that we're not perfect. Nobody's perfect. We're all far from it. However, it should be clear from the fruit. And what Jesus is meaning from the fruit is the impacts of people's ministry, of your life, what is coming from that. And everybody has it. Is it the self-interest and desires that we have, or is it our self-interest and desires falling far behind caring for other people, truthfully and effectively teaching the gospel and commanding and holding people accountable? Is that there? So Jesus is warning his disciples here to watch out for these false teachers. They were very wide in that day, and the church was growing, and they had to pay very close attention. But we have to pay just as close attention today, because there are so many opportunities for us to get off this path of following this narrow road. So in addition to looking at the leaders of this church and other churches or whatever, group that you're part of, you have to first look at yourself. You have to look at what fruit you're bearing. Are you bearing fruit at all? Because Jesus says only the trees with good fruit are going to be left standing. If you don't bear fruit or you bear bad fruit, you don't have to go commit murder to be cut down. You just don't have to produce fruit at all. He's clear of that. So which tree are you? Are you producing fruit? And if you are, is it good fruit or bad fruit? So that leads us back to verse 21. And I'm not going to read the rest of the verses here. But Jesus wants you. Jesus wants you to make a decision and a choice. And like I said earlier, you have to make it every day. But he wants your heart and he wants your life. Kylie, you can come back up here when you get a chance. I'm almost done here. But Jesus wants you to say, Lord, not your will, but my will be done. Elizabeth talked about it last week. I talked about it a couple weeks ago. Jesus is sitting in the garden before his crucifixion. Easter's coming up. So we probably talk about this multiple times in the next few weeks. But he's sitting in the garden knowing what's about to happen. He's about to pay for your sins. He's about to feel the full burden and wrath of God for every bad thing that you've done and will do. And let's be clear, we don't do good things. So everything we do, Jesus paid the price for that. We can do his will simply by treating others how Jesus would treat them. And this is really hard. We can't do it. Like we said earlier, there's no way to do that. But when you choose to enter this narrow gate every day and you wake up and you say, Jesus, I'm choosing you today. Jesus says, hey, I'm going to be on this road with you. And he's going to walk with you every step. And he's eventually going to let that love of Jesus kind of come off on you. And then others are going to see Jesus in your life. And you're going to start treating people like Jesus treats them. Now, I didn't teach this today to make anyone here question their salvation. But I would also be very remiss if I didn't make it clear Jesus' warning in these passages. These passages are intense. That there's going to be some on Judgment Day, maybe people in this room, that stand in front of Jesus and say, Jesus, I did this, I did that. Let me in. And he's going to say, get away from me, weirdo. I don't know you. Just because you know my stats, you don't know me. So I want to close by reading the lyrics of a song. I love this song. It's called Teach Me to Dance by Jervis Campbell. By the way, there's a new acoustic version out. If you haven't listened to it, go check it out on Spotify. It says, there's a storm deep inside me, raging with thunder. And I know I can't hide it for the tempest that comes. I can feel it all, the weight of my burdens. I know that I can't do this alone. There's a road set before me. Oh, I can see it. Don't know where it's going, but Lord, I'm afraid. And I've heard the sound, oh, the sound of revival. I just want to walk here in your ways. I want it straight in the heart. Feed me your fire. And I know it's so hard, but out of the darkness I'll choose. Because you are my everything. I want to meet my maker. Oh, teach me to dance so I can dance with you. Teach me to dance so so I can dance with you.